welcome to Money and You, an initiative of the Financial Services Council that aims to grow your financial confidence and well-being. Today, we're looking to the future of technology and investing with the CEO of wealth technology platform Invsta, Rachel Strevens. Welcome, Rachel, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Clarissa. Thanks. It's great to be here.
So really keen to chat to you all things technology and investing. But first, I'm wondering if you could give a little bit of an explanation as to what Invsta does. So I read on your website, it says that Invsta creates wealth technology to power better financial experiences. So what does that mean for your average New Zealander?
Yeah, sure. So we're a B2B fintech provider, which means that we provide and develop technology and bring technologies to solutions to the market, which we sell or license to other financial businesses, such as fund managers, KiwiSaver providers, and financial advisors across New Zealand. So even though we're selling our products to other financial service providers, with the majority of our technology, it's not actually just a solution that's used internally by the staff members within that company. Rather, it's more of an interface between the end investors and their fund manager, their financial advisor, or their KiwiSaver provider. So in effect, the technology that we develop is actually being used by end investors. And when we talk about powering better financial experiences, we're really looking at how we can use technology to improve the way in which the end investors and customers engage and interact with their finances and investments. So we're looking at technology solutions. We're really looking at everything with a lens of the investor in terms of we really want to delight and excite the end investor and end users so that they do sort of look towards these investments more, that they do engage more with their finances.
So obviously we've seen a huge explosion of new technology and platforms in the investing space in the past few years, and I'm sure investors behind a lot of that. What have you seen as being some of the key trends in this space?
Yeah, cool. So I guess, one of the sort of key things here is that by using technology, it does allow your financial service providers to really reduce their operating costs. So it means as a starting point that it makes it a whole lot more feasible for these financial service providers to actually service investors who have got a lower dollar amount to invest. And I think that's a really sort of key starting point in terms of why technology is so beneficial here and why we've seen such a big explosion of new fintech and investment platforms come to the market. I guess a real focus and a drive with these fintech platforms has been on digital customer experience. If you look back sort of in terms of the industry, and certainly when I was working in the industry before starting Invsta, technology was pretty clunky. There wasn't a whole lot of focus on that actual customer experience from a digital format. It was all very manual, very hands-on. And so it's really great that we have seen such a big sort of shift and change come through over the last few years. I think one of the big things that has been driving this is a real sense of FOMO in that, some of these investment platforms have done a really, really great job in terms of bringing awareness and bringing that investment conversation through to the wider audience and the wider population of New Zealand. And it is creating a lot of awareness. It means that everybody's talking about it, and there is a real sense of FOMO going on. Everybody wants to be involved. Everybody sort of wants to know what's going on and how they can. I think it's quite exciting for people to actually think that they can actually start growing their wealth and growing their finances and their investments.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and the fact that you can just whip out your smartphone and do it instantly and so efficiently. Obviously technology's enabled that.
One of the other big things and really big trends that we have seen come through is a real focus on investor education and upskilling financial literacy. And I think that's fantastic because it has been fairly well recognised that historically within New Zealand we have had pretty poor levels of financial literacy. And so one of the really big trends that has come through, and a lot more recently as well through these fintech and financial investment platforms, is a really big focus on helping people to upskill and actually understand what's going on with their investments. And so I think that's a huge benefit to sort of investors at large and the wider economy, that people are actually understanding and taking note of what is actually going on with their investments. Some of the other key trends that we've seen come through is, and again, this one is a lot more recent, is actually the development of an open ecosystem for financial service companies. And so things like APIs and sort of a bit more of an open economy, it means that we're starting to see fintech players sort of specialize in their product offerings, and that we're seeing a lot more sort of best in breed technology solutions come through. So it really does sort of have an impact on the overall sort of experience and the technology that is coming through here, because you've got all these sort of fintech companies innovating and really coming through with their best product, which they're actually then partnering with some of the incumbents in the market and bringing these technologies through to the wider audience.
Just for anyone who may not know what an API is, would you just be able to explain that to the layman out there?
APIs, or application programming interface, is basically sort of how two different providers or two technology solutions might talk to one each other. Right. So it's sort of allowing the open flow of data effectively to integrate with other providers. So instead of sort of having, shared files that you might sort of send around and people are sort of working off shared files or that kind of a thing, which previously happened, actually now we can communicate a whole lot easier via sort of technology, talking to other technology kind of automatically, and sort of ingesting data or pulling through information in that kind of automated format.
Oh, brilliant. So my next question for you, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but how can technology help investors? What are the benefits for, say, me or someone who is a retail investor who might be using some of this technology?
Yeah, sure. So I think, sort of in general, technology is a huge benefit to the wider investment audience within New Zealand, globally, really anywhere you look. And that can be broken down into multiple different levels. Firstly, I think, is access. So again, if we sort of look back historically, you did sort of have to have a reasonably large sum of money to invest to be able to go and talk to an investment advisor or to access a lot of different product types. So that's one area where we've seen sort of probably the greatest benefit to quite the wide population, is actually now we can actually access these investment products. We can access so many different types of asset classes that were previously not available to a smaller investor. So, whether you're looking at direct shares, managed funds, ETFs, global investments, property, crypto, the list just goes on, and we're sort of seeing new things come through all the time that are actually being made a whole lot more accessible through technology. So that's kind of probably the first sort of really core element, is that it's just really increasing the space so that a whole lot more people can be involved and actually benefit from, sort of looking after their finances and their investments. I think that, there is a continual drive in terms of usability for technology. So previously, where things had been quite clunky, quite difficult to use, fintech platforms and sort of these new companies coming through are really, really focusing in on how do we make sure it's a really nice customer experience and that things are sort of intuitive and as easy as possible. And so previously, where one example might have been trying to open a new investment account, and you had sort of maybe a 10 to 20 page application form that you had to go through and fill in. Whereas you compare that now to the digital onboarding process for the likes of an online investment platform, and it's quick, it's easy, you're done in a couple of minutes, and it's so intuitive. So again, it just helps to create that really nice online customer experience. And again, bringing it back to education and financial literacy, I think this is really, really important, is that along with accessibility, technology is actually helping to drive people understand finances and investments a whole lot more, understand what's going on, and understand how by making small investments over time and a whole lot of other investment concepts, it's actually really helping them to sort of be better off in the future for themselves, their families, their wider networks.
I'm interested to know what kinds of technology digital tools and platforms are investors wanting? So what should financial service providers, whether it might be a bank or a KiwiSaver provider, an insurer, what kind of things should they be thinking about offering to their customers if they're not already doing so?
Yeah, so first, I think that among investors these days, because we spend so much of our lives online and in an online environment, there is a really clear expectation that financial service providers actually need to be playing in that digital space. And the bar has been really set quite highly by fintech platforms who have got a really, really nice user experience. And so the bar's been actually set pretty high. You know, if you're a financial service provider and you don't have these online tools, customers and investors coming through are going to be taking a look at you and pretty quickly going and trying to look at what other alternatives there are, because there is that really sort of base level of expectation that you should be playing in this digital space and you should be doing it at a certain minimum level. And if it's too difficult, hey, I'm just not even going to bother. So I think that's sort of the key thing is you know, actually sort of an understanding more so from some of the bigger, larger, more traditional players within this space that we do actually need to up our game when it comes to some of these digital technologies and digital functionality. I think what we're seeing now is that the importance of data. So, you know, there's a lot of debate going on about data and access to data and privacy and all those kind of things. But data does help drive a lot more tailored experiences and a lot more sort of customization at an individual investor level. So nowadays, when you're looking at your investments and things, you're not particularly interested if you're seeing some generic thing that maybe not of relevance to you, you're not particularly interested in it. But I think there is a really big drive in terms of that personal communication. So how do we use, and I guess this is one thing that companies are looking at, is sort of how do we understand our clients better so that we can actually serve them up and tailor our communications that are going out to them to something that's really of interest to them. And data from Capgemini, which is a World Wealth Report, shows that 74% of high net worth investors are actually saying that they would turn to big tech wealth management services for that personalized digital experience. You know, we're all used to sort of having that come through nowadays with those big tech companies, and people are sort of starting to have that expectation level come across to their investments and their financial experiences as well, because they're really wanting to see information that's relevant to their personal needs and their personal situation. I think another really sort of interesting thing that we are seeing is around sort of impact measurement. So, you know, we've seen a really, really big push and a big driver in terms of socially responsible investment over the last few years. I mean, it's been there sort of bubbling away for quite a while, but it's really, really come to the fore over the last couple of years. And so investors are really actually wanting to, you know, they're kind of driving, they're kind of pushing this change, but they do want to know how their investments are helping and sort of dig a little bit deeper and actually understand that. So no longer is it sort of, I think, okay to say that, you know, by investing in this fund or doing this and doing that, you're sort of helping the environment per se. People actually want to know a little bit more about that and sort of graphically see or understand it at another level, how we're helping and what impacts we're having. So, you know, for providers to be able to actually integrate with some of these cool new fintechs that are coming out that are actually helping to track some of these things and monitor things is a really, really good way to sort of help satisfy the investors' demand and the investors' want for some of these sort of impact measurements. Another thing that we are sort of seeing come through is in terms of goals tracking. So data from Calastone shows that the top two things that millennials are saving for is travel and purchasing their first home. And so if you can make it really easy for people to set a goal and measure how they're tracking towards that goal, it just really drives that much more interaction and engagement with their investment products. And again, I think that's a really nice, really easy way to help sort of people stay on track. So you're giving your customers that value and at the same time helping them to reach their goals. And the only other thing I would sort of add to that is really self-service functionality. Gone are the days where you have to send in an email or a letter even, or call up somebody to change your address, your phone number, your tax rate, any of those things. So putting all of those tools in the hands of the customers is just really kind of a basic thing that is kind of at that base level expectation now, I think, in terms of what investors are sort of expect should be there. That's kind of one of the minimum sort of things that should be there. And all the other things that I've talked about are kind of the nice extra bits and pieces on top that will really sort of help to drive that engagement and experience and sort of brand loyalty, I think.
No, that's really interesting that it's not just about making information about how your investments are performing available to people, but also I liked that you touched on the whole thing around being able to see like where your money's invested and are your investments are they sustainable, environmentally friendly, all that kind of thing, which is obviously becoming more and more important to so many people now.
It's one of the biggest trends that there is out there, I think. And if you really want to do well, I think that the more you can engage customers in that level, it's only going to be beneficial for you.
I'm wondering, is there anything that you've seen happening elsewhere in the world, maybe in Australia or the UK or somewhere overseas that might be a bit ahead of the curve? Is there anything that we can expect to see here in New Zealand in the next maybe 5 or 10 years when it comes to technology?
Yeah, sure. So I think, one of the big things is open banking or open finance or open information, open data, whatever it is you want to call it. In New Zealand, we're quite far behind the spectrum, I think, and sort of, a lot of other markets like the UK and Australia in regards to this. And what that means is really just sort of the open flow of information and being able to share information between different providers. With more than 87% of countries have established some form of open banking. So we are really sort of considered a bit more of a beginner when it comes to this area. But if you start to look at open banking, again, it really helps to drive some of that more sort of tailored and sort of customized information at an individual level. And that's where things are really going these days, is sort of really hyper-personalized, hyper-customized to the individual in terms of what's relevant for them and what can help them. So by actually by sort of having more of a framework for that open data sharing coming through within New Zealand, I think there's really cool things that will be able to happen within that space. Things like being able to pull all of your investments or all of your financial information through into sort of one area to be able to sort of see an overall picture of that and actually get advice across the whole spectrum of that rather than things operating sort of in individual silos. There's a lot more sort of details and insights that we'll be able to gather that are really going to sort of help the advice and sort of what those individual customers and individuals should be doing with their funds and with their money. And then I think the other thing on top of that is actually AI. And again, so this is really sort of in its infancy here in New Zealand if we're looking at investments and finances. But there are some things starting to come through globally on this level. And when you actually really combine the option of sort of layering AI on top of the open economy or open data sharing, that's where you really do sort of see some enormous benefits and quite cool things start to come through for both investors and the companies alike. So I think those are probably sort of two of the areas that here in New Zealand we are sort of a little bit behind the 8 ball. We've got things in place, things that are going on here that should help to see some of those new technologies and some of those new things come through. But I think those are two really core areas that will play a pretty big role within the space in New Zealand over the coming years. A couple of other sort of just things that I think I've touched on already will be, really customer centricity in terms of that hyper-personalization, right? And those are some of the tools, the AI, the open data, that are really going to drive some of those. But that is a big focus for everything now. And I think it's only going to go more so down that path. And again, customer data is sort of sitting behind that, right? So customer data will become the single biggest source of competitive advantage for companies in terms of being able to drive that hyper-personalization. And I think, again, that will sort of help to bring through, and we're already seeing this actually, but is more of a trend for financial service providers to actually take more of a holistic approach. So rather than operating in silos or sort of, looking at sort of investments or finances, one by one, is actually taking more of that overall approach. And again, that's where all of these things that we've just talked about now will actually pull together and really help to drive that more sort of holistic approach or holistic advice, which is really going to be a benefit to the underlying investors.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing all of that. Now I have one final question for you, and I guess it's around, it's really exciting to see all these developments when it comes to technology, but also at the same time, it's almost like the face-to-face human interaction is potentially disappearing. We see, the rise of like robo-advice, and now, people can get financial advice from a robot. And I've personally never tried it, but I know that that's something that a lot of companies are sort of working on at the moment. I'm just keen to get your thoughts on whether there is still a role for that face-to-face human interaction in all of this technology change.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think in terms of robo-advice or digital advice, we've seen a little bit of it here. It's sort of, again, it's really in its infancy here within New Zealand. And it's very early days, I think, in terms of the end investor experience, or how much those end investors and end customers are actually interacting with a robot per se. I think one of the things that, one of the really good things about robo-advice, I feel, is that it's actually, a lot of the tools involved with that are actually about automating sort of some of the more manual, the time-consuming processes behind the advice scene. And what that actually does is it frees up the human advisor's time to actually allow a whole lot more value-added activities. So instead of your human advisor sort of having to spend a whole lot of time on administration and some of those sort of real heavy lifting tasks, a lot of those things are actually being automated through like a robo-advice or a digital advice process now. And it does actually leave the advisor more time to really provide those value-added and those human sort of touch points. It's incredibly important, I think, still to be able to maintain those human touch points. I think, when robo-advice kind of first came up, it was touted that it was going to sort of replace, advisors' jobs. And I don't really think we've seen that happen. I think what we have seen happen is more of a hybrid type approach to it, whereby a lot of advisors are realizing that there are some benefits from some of these tools in terms of, again, some of those sort of automated processes that I've talked about. But there's also definitely a recognition that, hey, it is still a value for particularly at a certain segment of the market or certain segment of investors to actually be able to go and talk things through with an advisor and sort of have that trusted relationship, which you're not really going to get from your computer screen per se. So yeah, like I don't think sort of your traditional human financial advisors are going anywhere anytime fast, but I think that the smart ones will actually be looking to some of these digital advice or robo-advice type processes that they can actually integrate into their systems just to help them work a little bit smarter, help to free up some time and really sort of allow them to bring that personal element to the relationship instead of having the personal time spent on, sort of boring administrative tasks in the background that do need to happen, but there's better ways of doing those types of things. Yeah,
and I imagine that leads to a better outcome for the customer or the person seeing the advisor too, right? If they're really getting the most value out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, investors now do enjoy the combination between sort of, using technology when it's accessible and when it's warranted for that type of situation. But I think they do also enjoy being able to pick up the phone or sort of, catch up and sort of see their advisor in person. So I think, investors sort of are expecting now, even high net worth investors are expecting that there are benefits from technology and digital advice processes, and they are expecting to see some of these tools come through from their wealth advisors. But they are also expecting that their wealth advisors will be there at the end of the day, sort of to reach out to if and when need be.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. It was really, really exciting and interesting to hear you talk all about, what could potentially happen, what's already happening in terms of the technology that investors are using. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things progress over the next sort of 5 or 10 years. So thanks again for your time. It was really great to chat to you.
Yeah, fantastic. We're really excited about technology and how that sort of plays out in this space. So yeah, it's a really cool, really exciting time, and just sort of seeing the benefits that it's having for on end investors and end customers. So thank you.